Okay, I'm sharing my screen. Shailesh, if you can confirm and someone from
Yeah, yeah,
your
yeah.
team.
It is visible. Please go ahead.
Good. Okay, so today's topic, which I have selected, is importance of collaboration between energy audit and solution development, and along with M&V in ESCO, a typical ESCO. So there are some key takeaways to take from this session, and there are some things which I would like to discuss with all of you, wherein as an energy and sustainability professional, we need to be cautious and careful to make sure that all these items are covered properly and we don't leave the gaps, so that the collaboration is good and everything goes smooth. Okay, so I'll start session. Just a request is that if you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A section, and I'll come back to it in the Q&A section, which we'll have at the end of this session. So it will like continue the thought process and our presentation for the rest of the teams, and I'll make sure the question is answered at the end in the Q&A session. Also, you can maybe write on later on. If you have anything in mind, you can write to me and I'll come back to you with the solution if I'm not able to cover in this session. So I have about 18 slides, so I'll try and stick to the slides. So basically, we are going to talk about the problem statement. The problem statement is basically lack of collaboration between these three elements of energy performance cycle. Then I'll just simply cover what is the scenario and energy business. Firstly, focus on India and then globally, what is happening. So energy business is changing. The third section is about elaboration of our topic of discussion today, the webinar today. The last session, I'll touch base upon M&V for the people who are not that much conversant with what is M&V. In India context, at least, M&V is still relatively newer and not that much perpetuated in the EPCs. And finally, I'll share the takeaways which I think can be of good use. Okay, just a small disclaimer, the views and thoughts that I'm presenting here are just my thoughts, and my employer organization has nothing to do with it. Okay, so coming to the problem statement. So what happens, the energy audits that we perform, basically, like they are not in synergetic approach with the EPC cycle. So EPC cycle basically starts with a RFP, then we go for a walkthrough audit, then an IGA happens. Over here, we are typically talking about IGA. So assuming that IGA we have done, and then the things have gone ahead. Then it comes to solution development. Then we go into the project phase where execution install happens. We do testing and commissioning, and the service period starts. So service period is basically guarantee period. And over here, measurement verification comes in. On these two stages also it comes, but I'll cover that part in the later slides. So what happens is, the problem is because of this non-synergy or improper collaboration, the guaranteed savings which an energy auditor commits are vastly impacted. So especially when we go into the service period, then we suddenly start seeing that the guarantee is not matching, we are not matching, we are not meeting the guarantee. All these things are happening. So this session will cover those points which which are affecting the guaranteed savings and which can be addressed to reduce this anomaly. Okay, so just to touch base upon how is the energy scenario and in India. So in India, typically about 15 to 20 years ago, we started with the retrofits, and the audits were performed by firms, agencies, not especially a certified ESCO at that time. And someone used to give a guarantee that I'll give you a saving of so and so percent. And the organization used to go ahead, conduct an audit, and that's it. The auditor used to leave and the thing used to stop there. Okay, then we are not, at that time, we were not seeing like, is the guarantee met or not? Like, is that saving happening or not? In this, I'm talking from the commercial and retail establishment point of view. Industry sector was at that time also pretty sorted. We had proper rules and regulations. We had a monitoring mechanism in place. This is, I'm talking from commercial point of view. Then basically in 2002, BEE was formed under Energy Conservation Act. A bill was passed by then conducting government, and then certain guidelines were given for evaluation and performance. So a framework was developed to kind of evaluate the performance of the equipments. So actually the audit itself also was not properly framed. So this BEE gave us some guidelines on how to conduct the audit in a proper manner. Currently, we have PAT scheme going on under NEMI, and we have PAT M&V. So PAT M&V, this is not measurement and verification as such, but this is monitoring and verification audit. So which is conducted by MPanel accredited auditors of BEE. And this generally happens for the DCs. Again, commercial sectors and retail are not covered as of now. Then around the same time, basically, in US, we guys, I'm audible to you all, Shailesh and someone from the audience.
Yes. Yeah. You are audible.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So yeah, so at the same time, around that time, in early 2000, late 1990s in US, a protocol for measurement and verification was defined. So it came under IPMVP. It got slowly adopted by all the countries now across the globe. And it is basically to validate the energy cost avoidance and savings. So there are some terminologies in M&V where we don't say directly saving, but we say cost avoidance. It is for a reason, but it's out of the scope of this session right now. Maybe sometime when I'm going to take a M&V dedicated session, at that time I can elaborate on this point. So basically it is to eventually validate and report the guaranteed savings. So whatever audit we would do and ECMs we would develop and design, and then we come up with a guarantee. So it was to validate and report them in a certain format. As I mentioned, in India, we are still not using this effectively on a large scale. But nowadays, as the sustainability and energy business is getting its due credit and attention, I'm hoping that with this kind of webinars and awareness, we take measurement and verification and the entire EPC more seriously, and a proper reporting structure can be used. So again, at this time, what happened is that involvement of various regulating agencies came into place. So and as the cash flow increased in this, the World Bank also got interested. And as the World Bank came in, things got to accelerate very fast. So I'll go to the next slide. So basically, World Bank then kind of took over a project called ISMAP. So ISMAP is Energy Sector Management Assistance Program. So they started to evaluate the performance of the EPC projects. So EPC is energy performance contracting, basically. So then they started to evaluate and assess on measuring the performance of the energy efficiency, because we always look at efficiency improvement at that time, retrofits, and wherever efficiency improvement was there, not necessarily with a new equipment, but with some change in the working pattern of the equipment or reducing the losses, those kind of things were used, and all those things were started to measure. Then reporting and acceptance of savings was more stringently monitored, and it was given more importance. So eventually, IPMVP came into existence. It is an international protocol for measurement and verification, and it started as an enabler for NEMAP, so National American Energy Management Measurement Protocol. It was started to fund the older buildings to be revamped, and those fundings needed to be properly monitored because the banks were giving the funds mostly at that time. So then this actually came under Federal Energy Management Program under Department of Energy around 1997. So it got incepted. Now, as of now, currently we have M&V under ISO 50015. ASHRAE guideline 14 also gives the proper guides for M&V, and ISO 50001 in general also covers the M&V and energy performance as a whole. But IPMVP is more populously used now under EVO and AEE as well. But we do have these guides also in place. Coming to the next slide is basically ESCOs are now taking longer term projects in the service period, especially for Americas and Europe region. Now also in Middle East, we have projects with 5, 10, up to 20 years of guaranteed savings that we are entering into. These kind of contracts are entered into. This point, I would like to take a couple of minutes for you to understand, for every one of us to actually understand here, is that the budgets for doing measurement and verification have reasonably increased compared to 15, 20 years back. Still, they are not sufficient, but they have increased. So what happens is that in the initial sales pitch, the sales team kind of, to keep the cost competitive in the market, they do not account for M&V. At the end, what happens is that the entire EPC project that we do does not kind of stand true to its guarantee. And at that time, we start kind of giving up penalties to the customer. And it also at the same time gives a bad reputation, and all those things happen. So I think if we can start looking at measurement and verification as a investment instead of a cost, because right now M&V is thought of as a cost. M&V initially started as like it will be an offset amount from the achieved savings. So the general thought process of entire energy community also was that M&V is a cost, and that cost can be offsetted from the savings achieved, and generally it should not hit more than 10% of the savings. So for example, let's say, hypothetically speaking, if you are getting, let's say, $100,000 saving in 5 years, then you should not spend more than 10% of it. So $10,000 is the cap that you will spend on measurement and verification activities, this being cost. But in these last 20 years is what we have seen is that if the guarantee is not met, there are so many things that we can do, we could have done, which would save us, the company or the ESCO, the penalty that we need to pay. As we are entering into guarantee contracts, guarantees are definitely like, if you are not meeting the guarantee, then the shortfall in the payment, shortfall in the avoidance, cost avoidance basically, will be paid by ESCO. So it kind of hits ESCO if we are not meeting the guarantee. So we should look it as an investment and give its due credit and have some reasonable estimates. And at the initial stage itself, we should not look it as a cost, but we can look it as an investment. Or we also take insurances. So many types of insurances we take during the project phase. There are so many bonds that we sign. So why not go for or think of M&V as an insurance and give some more due credit to do it reasonably, properly, well, with a good quality, and go ahead. So keeping it minimal was the status quo till now, but I think we should think of it as we do need to keep it minimal. We don't want to take much from the savings, but still we can do it more in a quality manner if we have some more funds in it. Okay, so while doing this, when trying to do it in a minimal stage, what happens is that MNV is not able to do its function as a evaluating of the performance. We only do a validation and energy cost avoidance. So that can be avoided. So I hope this point I have put it across well. I'm moving to the next section where we are talking about the collaboration gaps. So wherever the gaps are there and areas of improvement are there, these points I have included. These are not all points, but the major points which we could discuss in this short period of time. Uh, I would presume that most of the team that would have joined here would have some energy background in some capacity. And I think if there are some questions or queries, I can address in the Q&A if something is not very clear over here. So basically what happens, like why we go into a shortfall or why we are having issue of not meeting guarantee is basically not starting in the service phase. It is starting at the audit phase itself, because it starts from the beginning. It is like if the audit is not done properly, it's a garbage in, garbage out effect. So if the data is not collected properly, if the quality check is not done of that data, then we are bound to have issues later stages. So fuel analysis also is an important part. In commercial and retail establishment, if from India perspective, we only have electricity, but other regions, like let's say Americas and other regions, we have different type of fuels, which is natural gas, fuel oil, propane, batch fuels, wood chips, and all those kind of things. So during the audit phase, the fuel analysis of these batch fuels also needs to be done properly. It is sometimes not done. Then utility bill study, it is the fundamental of energy auditing. It needs to be done properly. We have to see the demand side also, not just the KWH. The description of the building and the measurements where you are taking needs to have a reference. Uh, the auditor kind of does some measurements, but it might be a case where he would have selected a location which is not appropriate or would give errors in the readings. And basically, it will be reflected at the end stage. So this quality check has to be done at the start only. I want to make one point which I kind of missed at the start. This is all interrelated. All this, so energy audit to solution development to install to commissioning, the slide number 1 which I showed, is all interrelated, and the error starts to compound. So if we start making errors or ignorance over here, it starts to compound, and that lack of collaboration, communication kind of starts to build up. And then if eventually it is giving us not meeting guarantee kind of issues. Okay, then these two are very important items. So inaccurate baseline. So when we are doing an audit and an auditor is establishing a baseline, we have to look it as a longer event. We have to take care of the transitions. Sometimes the projects takes time, so we have to adjust the baselines accordingly, even before the start of the guarantee period. So for that, a proper change order needs to be initiated. If all parties involved need to be informed about this. The change order also, like this change in the baseline, in case before the service period start or guarantee period start, needs to be properly assessed, and then we should go ahead, because everything is based on your baseline, because your baseline is what you are comparing, you're going to compare in your service period. So the service period your savings are based on what you're talking as a baseline. So that is a very crucial and important factor. If you did not do a baseline proper, if you're not taking care of these factors to get your baseline proper, then everything is bound to make an issue. So inaccurate base load. So we have to see base load also. Now there is difference between baseline and base load. Baseline is for entire utility. Base load is also for entire utility, but base load is basically independent of any variables. So mostly that load is, let's say, for a simpler example, it is independent of the weather. So let's say your lighting is more or less independent of your weather. Your weather will not that much affect your lighting. You will need a office premises lighting, let's say all your office working hours 365 days a year. It really doesn't matter how the weather is. It will slightly matter for the common areas or open areas where you have daylight, but let's say in the internal environment, to keep it simple, the lighting will not change much. So that we call it as a base load. Similarly, there are different types of base load. So your base load also has to be properly assessed and analyzed. The very important last part is end load and usage analysis. So the meters which are supplying these fuels, which are supplying to your end load, that analysis also needs to be done at the audit stage, which is sometimes missed by the auditor to do a detailed end load analysis. This goes down to the fundamentals of energy auditing, where you have to do a proper energy balance. And if you're not finding the energy balance right, definitely you have not done the end load analysis proper, and something is missing, which you should address at that time only. I'll move to the next section. So this is in the audit stage. So what happens after audit? So this point where I'm moving my pointer, this is an important point. What has happened currently is we have different agencies for doing audit. We have a different team. Let's say if it is not a different agency, within the same organization, you might have a different team uh, sitting somewhere across the globe who is going to do solution development for that audit. Okay, so there is an offload, okay, to develop the ECMs. So in this, if the transition is not proper and the data transfer is not proper to the solution development engineer from the auditor, then this gap of communication and knowledge is going to create issues, because the understanding of auditor being on site and having the visibility will be definitely different than what the SD engineer sitting across the globe would have, or in the same office who has not seen the site will have. So it will, as I discussed earlier, it will create a garbage in garbage out effect, because uh, it will be not a proper estimate or a calculation that the person will do if the communication and transfer is not right. What we can do, as I mentioned earlier, our documentation, our sample size needs to be proper, and everything needs to be written. So when I used to extensively do energy auditing, I used to have like one or two line statements across all the measurements that I used to take. Like for a reference, when I'm going to give these readings or these measurements after downloading the log for, let's say, 7 days or 3 days or something like that, it's human to kind of forget some key things. So the location where you have taken the picture has to be a relative picture. One picture can be of the exact meter with the exact readings, that's all good, but then you have to have a relative picture, like where you have taken that measurement. You can make out, like the SD is sitting across the globe can also make out, like, okay, this measurement was taken in this section of the building. And of course, using the as-built drawings of the building, you can also mark those locations on the drawings, which will give a holistic picture as a bird's eye view or a kind of a remote remotely that person would be there on that site. That way, if the audit report goes to the SD, then it is a good thing to happen. Skills and capabilities. So sometimes the agencies that we offload some work to, we have to make sure that the skills and capabilities of the team are properly assessed before we go through the sample reports or the sample projects they would have done in the past, and then go ahead and see if there is any gap, then we can address it in the beginning only. Coming to the solution development itself, uh, what happens is with time, if you are spending more time on audits and you have done this for long, then you kind of have a hitch, and you kind of like, okay, what the numbers would be. So people tend to use after having more experience or something like that. Or this is true for both cases, like this is for freshers as well as too much of experience. We start to use thumb rules or word of mouth, and we start to assume some numbers. Let's say we would assume an efficiency without going back to the auditor, like asking him, I need some more readings to properly calculate and assess the saving, like estimate the saving. So for each estimate, there has to be a logical and analytical reasoning for to go ahead with. Okay, assumption, like assuming, is not going to help. Estimating in a proper way will definitely help. Uh, okay, so I'll move to the next slide. In solution development itself, like incorrect sample size, so number of readings. This again happens at the initial stage. You need to know the sample size, number of readings that you need to take. You need to be aware of how many variations would come on the site, and factor number of readings or the sample size at that time only. So the planning stage of the audit also links to the solution development. This where I'm moving my pointer is another important factor. Uh, a correlation need not be forced every time. Like you need not see a correlation every time, which is a good thing also. Like if we are doing a regression with weather, the consumption with weather, either with heating or cooling degree days, then you might not see a correlation, which is fine. Then at that stage, you do not force it. Like you start removing some data points, and then you will see some points which are relatively satisfying the statistical R square value. And then you will see a good equation of y is equal to mx plus c with R square of 0.9, and you'll be very happy. That's not the case that we should do. If there is no correlation with all the data points, least minimum 12, then don't force it. Okay. At the same time, don't ignore also. If there is a proper correlation, just go ahead with it. Don't do too much analytical reasoning. It has to be a balanced effort. So again, a solution to this gap is basically, if a correlation is not there, then there is definitely something which the auditor has missed on the site, which he has not informed you. Then we can go ahead and request for additional details from the site, and then you will get to know why that extreme saving that you're seeing in a given month is there. There might be an event on the site. Let's say if it is a school, then it might have some event for 4 5 days. There might be some sports competition going on. They would be using floodlights in the stadium for 5 days straight. It could be any event. So those kind of events will definitely move your correlation from a straight line, and those things needs to be properly validated. So yeah, so then the next one is inability to use statistics. So we as a energy professional, we need to use statistics right from auditing stage to solution development and then M&V. It's not just M&V deals with statistics. If we start with statistics, statistics need not be on all the time hypothesis validation. It can be simple stats like looking at the averages, looking at the means, looking at the outliers, those things, if they are validated with confidence and certainty, then it's a good number that you have, which you can go ahead in your calculations. The methodology that we use. So the methodology, the science, the logic, industry best practices needs to be clearly defined when we are developing an ECM. Why I'm saying this is because sometimes we develop an ECM without giving our detailed purview on that, assuming that the next person who is sitting across would know, like, from where you have come on, like what is the general formula. Like, we know the standard formulas for savings, so we would assume that this person would know certain formula, and I have done some twitching in that formula, and that is how this saving has come up. But don't assume. Write some words, have a methodology or a logic of your reasoning behind that development of ECM. So in case you are going for a toss in the, let's say, in the service period, then we can come back and validate, okay, this methodology or science is not working for a particular technology or an equipment. Another important part is feasibility and risk assessment. So this ties up with solution development as well as energy audit. So when we are developing solutions or when we are doing audit, we should see if it is feasible to implement that ECM. Just because an ECM is trending in the market doesn't mean that it is compulsory for us to use that ECM. We tend to do that nowadays. Everyone is behind, nothing against solar, but let's say there is something related to solar, then in your ECM list, if a solar ECM is missing, then it is counted as a foul. It should not be the case. Like, if you do not have proper insolence, you do not have proper azimuth, you don't have proper basically the sunlight or the uh, required things for getting your proper generation of solar. If your orientation of the building is not in a way to get that kind of maximal, in the first place, the efficiencies are already bad in case of solar. And then on top of that, if you are not taking care of these feasibility factors, if your orientation is out of way and you don't know what is happening related to the total availability of sunlight during that, and just because you have to go with solar, you're putting just something with a formula and generating total kWh from solar, it will barely meet that. And again, we are still not considering, let's say, operation and maintenance cost of solar, which is going to eat into our ECM through the service period also, to keep it clean, to keep it oriented. There is bird dropping. So many things are there which we have to take into the feasibility and risk assessment. Solar just was an example, but any ECM that we are going for, we should do a tangible study. Like, is it tangible and practicable to implement that on site? Will it work for that site? And the best view for it will be for an auditor. So that auditor, if he writes 2-3 lines, let's say, let the solution development guy go with solar, but there are terms and conditions attached to it, then it becomes a kind of a, let's say, a yellow or a red flag for SD guy to have some margin or some safety factor when he's projecting or calculating his savings. Okay, so that is about the solution development stage. Uh, Before moving to install, let me have a sip of water. I suppose the pace is fine, and the concepts and the points I'm making are coming across. So if someone can put in chat, uh, I'll get some clarity. From the audience, you can go to your chat section and you can put it in the chat. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Movin. Okay, so I'll. Sorry?
कोई question नहीं है.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, so go ahead.
Sure. Okay, coming to the install phase. Basically, this is the project phase. So assuming our audit is done, our ECM development is done, project is accepted, we have won the project, and we are going ahead with the project. Then over here also, there are some things which should be taken care of, so that assuming we have done everything right and we have taken care of all the things that I mentioned earlier, and all things are good, then from here onwards, there are these things which might cause a mess. So this, we are still not good. We are now into the most critical phase where actual implementation is happening. So some things we have to consider in this install phase. So in this install phase, one of the collaboration gap or an area of improvement is missing to give clear scope of work to the contractor or your consultant. Okay. So the ESCO, if they are doing it internally, again, the internal teams, as I said, there are multiple teams, there are multiple agencies, there are uh, uh, subcontracted personals, uh, third parties, all those things, all people involved who are going to be involved in the execution of this project needs to have a clear scope of work. The as-built and design requirements needs to be proper. So it starts from there. So this is an important point. To manage a EPC, so especially energy performance contracting, project management skills are slightly different. It's not as a regular install or commission project. We need to have someone who is at least a project manager who is at least having some kind of expertise in handling energy efficiency or retrofit projects. So the terminologies or the things that we will look at, it should not be alien to him or her. Lack of supervisory control by an energy expert. So for all these things that are going on in point 1 and 2, we need to have a supervisory control. We need to have a single point of contact who is taking care of these things and seeing that the install phase is going on smooth. This basically means the communication between the project manager, the auditing firm, and M&V specialist is critical. Now, M&V specialist in India perspective, it's really ignored. Like, we are still not giving its due credit or attention for the M&V. We do an audit, we do an execution, we move ahead. And M&V as a proper reporting is not happening, at least in the commercial and retail sector, to the extent which is happening at global level. It is happening, it's not like it's not happening, but it's not at the global standards. So especially from India perspective, we have to be even more careful for retail and commercial establishments. This point, again, I have to highlight, like auditing firm kinds of, if it is a separate firm, it kinds of moves out and the project manager is left to do the execution. We should not do that. The auditing firm, someone from the auditing firm who is conversant with that particular project should be available during the execution phase as well, because the auditor will know from what purview, what perspective that ECM was developed, and for commissioning, those things can be taken care of. A simple example would be of a VFD. So it's not just an install of VFD. If it is a new install of VFD, if the auditor is involved, then he would tell the project manager, like, from what point of view that VFD was placed over there, and from where his readings are coming on, and the post measurements that the project team has to give is at what place. There are, in the coming up slides, I'll tell you, like, there are instances where we get data of VFD, which is measured at a completely different place where it should not be measured. And that happens because probably the project manager or someone who is leading that project is not really conversant with the energy efficiency concept. So it's not having just a measurement, but where you measure, how you measure, and when you measure is also important. Then collection of utility data is not set up during the install stage also. So it is as well, because this is a critical stage. It needs to be set up in the install stage only. We need to go and request the customer that we will need your utility bills in the execution phase also. And because it takes time, we will need the authorization from them. If they are going to give it to us directly, well and good. But if they are not having time or all those things, then they might authorize us to collect the data on their behalf. Then the credential generation, if it is online, then all those things take time. And by that time, half of the project is done. We don't know what is happening on the utility side. And then we are missing out on the important pointers, which you will see in the utility bill if your project is going as per plan. Again, this point I covered earlier. So batch fuel record and tank readings are not collected. So it depends from site to site. So when we are doing install, we have to see that these kind of readings are taken by the team. So when we are having a closeout meeting with the maintenance and operations team, it is imperative that we tell them that we will need certain kind of readings, and we have to give them a list of what kind of readings we need, because they might be or might not be taking those readings in their general day-to-day activity. And all the readings, all the parameters that we are going to have over here needs to be reviewed and validated with some static factors reasoning. Static factor is again a kind of a M&V term. Without going in too much detail of it, I'll just say that basically static factors are the factors which should not change. Okay, so an example would be number of floors of a given building. So if you have done audit for let's say 10-story building, then ideally the number of floors of that building, active floors, working floors of that building will not change within 1 or 2 years. If they change, there are other procedures to be followed, but we are thinking of it as a static factor, which these things generally don't change. Number of floors on a building within a year will really not immediately change. Yes, there might be some instance where the customer might think of shutting down entire activity of a floor. Again, this calls for a non-routine adjustment, which is out of scope of this discussion. But then we have to review and validate the static factor. So basically, while doing auditing, the auditor also needs to be kind of aware of these things that he should take. So when I said in the first phase, poor description of building, so the building description has to be as detailed and as static factor oriented, if I would say, to get to a proper consensus, and we would be able to find out what is the reason in case there is a sharp spike even after implementing all these ECMs. Then we can find out there is a change in static factor, but they need to be measured or written down, like validated. We'll move to the next section. So once the install is completed, when we are coming into the testing and commissioning phase, the pre-commissioning measurements are not done. We tend to miss the pre-commissioning measurement. We think now this becomes especially important when the install period is large. I shouldn't say large, but it is longer. So if it is more than 1 year, 2 year, let's say because of maybe COVID or something happened and install period got stopped in between, and suddenly after 1.5 years we have started, then a pre-commissioning measurement is a must. We cannot rely simply on the audit measurements that were done at that time. So it is applicable for all cases. COVID is an exception, but other times also when we have a longer install or commissioning period, it is imperative to have it. Post commissioning measurements always very important. So these measurements are actually going to tell you if something has really changed and the solution developed by the SD are working or not. So these measurements, as I mentioned with an example of VFD, it can be in case of boiler also or something like that. We tend to miss to take critical factors. So yeah, that is another thing to remember. A measurement personnel should know what are the critical factors and what are the factors which can be estimated or it can be ignored also, which will not cause much issue. But a critical factor needs to be measured. So like for VFD, you need to know V by F or at least the amperage in a modulating format that you have to see. It is a critical V by F or V by I has to be measured. If you're not taking other parameters at the same time, if you're not taking speed and all other things at that time, it is okay because then you can calculate from your uh, critical factors, because from there only all those you can apply affinity law and all those things you can do. But if your first measurement, the critical measurement, is also not there, then how can you calculate also? The calculation part is generally called proxy measurements. So adjustments or bottlenecks are not addressed. Sometimes what happens, practically speaking, on a project, even our EPC projects also do not really go as per plan. So if you have a Gantt chart going on, it's not all take everything good and dandy. It will not happen. There will be some places where we will have to do adjustment. There will be some bottlenecks to implement certain ECMs. Certain kind of material might not be available uh, at that time. All those things will happen. So a record of all these things needs to be maintained. If something you have changed apart from aside from your as built design, that needs to be recorded. Okay, for certain thing we did not have certain set of cables with the certain ratings, we have gone ahead with certain type of cable, certain type of pipings, certain type of insulation. Those kind of changes which we did from the initial design needs to be addressed here and recorded. And for all these things we'll need developed and skilled resource to do these things. VFD we already discussed. Fuel switch, batch delivery. Now, fuel switch is a longer concept. So, looking at the time, I will not go too much in detail. But there are places where, let's say, your boiler is run on natural gas, and for a certain period of time, because of the pricing that we get, this is mostly applicable for the Americas or the colder countries, European areas, where the prices will vary according to season. So at that time, we kind of go to fuel switch. Again, fuel switch can be from point of sustainability point of view also. So it's not typically a price also as a factor. It can be your sustainability also as a factor, and you're switching the fuel. So you're switching the primary fuel from natural gas to propane or something like that. So those switches needs to be properly monitored. Uh, this one, the one which I'm highlighting, BMS savings, it's a very, very gray area. Uh, the solution development guys go with a thumb rule or a word of mouth or some average savings on BMS. BMS is basically building management system. We have so many BMS. Our own BMS is there. Honeywell provides the BMS. We have so many other players in the market who are having expertise in building management systems, which do help in monitoring and controlling the site effectively. However, the savings estimated or calculated needs to be properly developed or designed. It cannot be with some thumb rule or some assumption. All the trend points that we need to have, all the running hours that we are considering for a certain saving, all the parameters which we need for a equipment, as well as when I say equipment, let's say a chiller, then an AHU, then your dampers and all those things. So it needs to be in certain way for it to give a saving to you. That way, or that positions, those parameters need to be properly estimated, and those savings needs to come for a particular position. This much saving can be achieved, that can be given, but not as a whole. If you give a general overall estimate, it is not going to work in case of BMS. Uh, Finally, once your commissioning is completed, then we should not leave the site. The PM and the energy expert who I mentioned earlier needs to give a proper training to the O&M team, especially the maintenance team and operations team, to how to operate your new equipments that are installed on the site, their operations manual, what the set points that we have set, and how it needs to be controlled, how it needs to be viewed, what are the alarms that would come, how to address those alarms. All those things needs to be trained. In case we ourselves are not conversant with it, then we need to invite the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer, to give a detailed training of that, so that the O&M team will not mess up the things there. And then there is a lack of monitoring mechanism. If all these things are done well, but if you're not monitoring it, so like something which is of measurement. So measurement and monitoring go hand in hand. If you're not monitoring all these things properly, we really cannot validate if we are actually achieving it or not. So you cannot leave it at here. We need to have a monitoring mechanism in place. So in service period, this point kind of I elaborated in the last slide. So we need to have this schedules, trends set up. If all these parameters are actively communicating or not, that needs to be there. Manual overrides, if they are doing, we have to have a system in place that we will be able to see how many manual overrides were done, so that we can say that it was done manually, and go back and update our savings. This comes under non-routine adjustments, which I have mentioned here. Change in static factors, as I earlier said, if say suppose for some or other reason the customer has built another floor, then that is a change in static factors. We had done our estimates with let's say 10 stories in our calculations, but now if there is a 11th floor, then this is a change in factor, static factor, which in the service period needs to be assessed. For that, there are cases where customer might not inform you, so we need to have a provision of site visit. A M&V field specialist needs to be factored in our estimate to the customer, where we would take at least one site visit or maybe two site visits, depending on the complexity of the site, in an year, so that we can assess these factors. These factors come under basically non-routine adjustment and routine adjustment, which is a M&V concept. So you can have a read at it later on. Okay, so coming to the second last section, I might need some more time from the Q&A section, but I'll try to complete it. But I want the concept to go across properly. So this section is basically what is M&V and what are these ABCD options. So M&V is basically measurement and verification. Okay, so in ISO 50015, it says that it is to provide confidence to the interested parties that reported results are credible, with appropriate accuracy and management of uncertainty. Now, all those things which I said in last 1 hour are really important from the point of credibility and accuracy point of view. Otherwise, we can just say my ECM was going to give you 40% saving. Now it is giving, from my estimate, 38% saving. We are almost good. But no, now especially financial institutions getting involved, they need the accuracy to be measured properly. And also, as an energy professional, it is our moral responsibility also to see that whatever we have committed, we are achieving or not. So that's why we do measurement and verification of our ECMs. So basically, as per IPMVP, they have also given their definition over here. So broadly, there are 4 kind of options. Okay, these are options in plain English language, options that we can select to measure a certain ECM or a group of ECMs. Without going in too much details, option A basically means we will only measure key parameters, and it will have a certain measurement boundary. Okay, outside that boundary, whatever is happening, we will not be worried about it, or it will not come in our scope. So here maybe lighting can be an example, which if we are talking as an option A, then we are going to measure, let's say, total kWh or total run hour, and that will be our key measure parameter. Year on year, we will measure only that. If something else is happening outside it, of that lighting circuit, we are not going to measure that. When we call it as an option B, then we measure all parameters. So if a VFD is installed, then we will measure everything related to that motor and in and around that motor. If that motor is supplying something, so the end load analysis or end use analysis is important over here. Special, again, installation of additional meters will be required over here. So A is most cost effective. You might not need meters over here. You can do, nowadays, you can do virtual metering, you can do calculation based, and the actual runners you can get from BMS, whatever kind of programmer you're using, from that you can get all those details. This is most cost effective. This is certainly costly than this, because it will need more parameters measurement, it will need more meters. Now this is an electric motor example, but same thing if we are doing it for chiller on option B, then it will need more and more meters. Now option C is a whole facility measurement. So these two have boundaries. These are isolated basically. When we say isolation, retrofit isolation, these are isolation. So only for that VFD motor, we are doing measurement. But when we say option C, it is at the utility meter level. So your incomer, after the incomer, your utility meter will be there. On that meter, we will do the measurement, and all the ECMs that you have applied in your building will get a cumulative compound effect. It will also take care of your codependent factors. So those kind of things also will be cancelled out over here, and the final reading you will get at the utility level. So this is done for the entire facility level measurement. Then option D. Now this is most expensive method, where we do modeling, we do simulation, we use various kind of softwares to simulate a given building, incorporate all the parameters, develop all these ECMs into this simulation, and estimate the savings. This is a costlier method for newer buildings where we want LEED accreditation or something like that. It is trending now to use it. But in my personal opinion, it is too much of a cost to do measurement and verification. As I said, we need more funds in M&V. We need to allocate more cost for M&V, but it should not be costly to give you saving. Like if you're doing saving of 100,000, you should not be spending 60 or 70,000 to do your simulation, and effectively you will be left with 30,000 saving, which is really not going to achieve our goal. Nothing against option D, but it is not that much used. However, it is in the Western countries, it is used for newer projects and some retrofits projects. These four options I have just explained in maybe 5-6 minutes, but these are more detailed things. There are so many other parameters involved in it to achieve or to decide which option to give for a certain ECM. Like for lighting, you can give option C also. So it is a judgment-based decision from experience, from your budget and all those things that you will need to do. So basically, M&V is all about value of evidence over assumptions. So we want evidence, we want measurements, we want all the records and logs. We don't want any assumption. Okay, so coming to the conclusion and takeaway. So last 2 or I think 3 slides. So in my experience, what I've observed is if we bridge all these gaps which we discussed, okay, then the improved efficiency, sustainable operation, environmental protection, which is basically ethical and our main motive of all our energy professionals, energy and sustainability professionals can be achieved. Okay. And at the same time, the number of projects, EPC projects that fails can be reduced. And what happens if a project fails or if we are not meeting guarantee? It's not purely that we are not meeting energy cost avoidance or energy avoidance in itself. It is we are not meeting, and on top of that, we have wasted so much resources, so much install, so much commissioning, so much testing happened. We wasted time, we would have wasted money, which effectively beats the concept of energy efficiency and sustainability. So as a responsible energy professional, we really should give more attention to the points we discussed earlier. So my key takeaways and my recommendations over here. These are my recommendations. I may be right, I may be wrong, but we would have more experienced people maybe on this call who would have their own ideas, which they can share later on an email or on the LinkedIn, where we can grow, as we can learn from each other as a community. But which things which I think are like we should include M&V at the beginning of energy audit. Right now, where especially in Western countries, M&V is quite prevalent and established. Still over there, we get M&V involved in the commissioning stage or the install stage, which is kind of almost late. We do get them involved during the contract signing, so we will have a M&V plan, development activities and all those things we do. But while ECM is getting developed, if M&V guy is over there, then really they can collaborate between each other and we can have a beautiful outcome from that. So auditor needs to be acquainted with the digital data modeling and usage of analytics and statistical tools. This is important, especially in this age of data analytics. We really should give importance to modeling and analytical statistical reasoning. So more data we have, the better. But really not like that. Not more data better, more quality data, the better. So it will help in our statistics to establish a confidence level. Audit to be performed with practical and tangible solutions. We discussed this earlier. So again, M&V is already involved in commissioning phase. This is from India perspective. I'm saying, at least if we are not going ahead with audit stage, maybe because of lack of funds or whatever, at least during commissioning phase, we need to have them. And all these guys, the OEMs and PM, needs to work synchronously. FAT and SAT, which are done, site acceptance, factory acceptance test for whatever equipment you are commissioning, installing, has to be signed off with the M&V guy also. if your auditor, if your SD is well versed and who is on site, then well and good, that signature is fine. But if it goes through the eyes of M&V guy who has given a site visit, who is available on the site to validate this, then it makes more sense. Site visits and my bad over here. I'll correct this spot check I wanted to say over here. Spot checks should be done during the service phase. So it is imperative. If site has changed the static factors, you would really not know from your BMS. If they would have not connected it to BMS, there is really no chance. Again, then now we should have regulators also to define the policy to control these parameters, and governments to include it in bills and policies. Like we had Energy Conservation Act, we had its amendment in 2010 after 2001. Similarly, we need to have continuous. We have PAT scheme also right now. I'm talking from India perspective. Similarly, we should have a mechanism in place, or we should be passing a bill for the regulators to kind of have a policy for having reporting and measurement and verification done in a systematic manner. It will help. Sales should look at EPC life cycle and not just give a project, complete a project, not just complete, like win a project and move to the next bid. The entire EPC life cycle, the entire branding, the entire customer trust, all these things comes from the life cycle and not just winning the project. You might win a project, but if you don't have a good reputation and statistical data to support and a good feedback from that same customer, it's the next contract you are not going to get that easily. Now, similar to reporting statutory standards and codes, ranking and scoring systems which ECBC or LEAD and GRI uses, we need to have something as a statutory standard, because the ones which I mentioned, ASHRAE Guideline 14, ISO 15000, IPMVP, they all give protocol. These are not standards or statutory standards to be followed. So there is a huge gray area. We have a guideline, but that gray area needs to be fixed with some statutory and legal bindings. It will certainly help us a lot. Okay, it will give us accountability and more sensitivity to the quality, and we will meet on all the commitments, not only from energy cost avoidance and energy avoidance point of view, but EPC project and our end goal of having sustainability, protecting environment point of view as well. Yeah. This is what I wanted to put across to you. I suppose I have completed within time. I have taken 9 minutes extra, but I suppose I have clarified all the concepts which I wanted to get it across.
Yes, yes, sir. Sir, here is a question from Narayan Korode. Have you tackled proving of the saving on the BMS saving before and after consumption reduction and its dedicated allocation to the BMS?
How to tackle, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So yes, there are multiple ways to tackle. One is you need to, when you are installing, let's say, a new BMS. I'm assuming you're talking about a new BMS. If it is a retrofit, it becomes all the more complex. But let's say you're going ahead with a new BMS, then you should make sure that all the ECM points which you have selected for connecting your equipments are listed there. Okay, that is the first point. Second point is you need to trend all those points, all those parameters in your BMS. Third is you have to have this BMS data download and connectivity with you. So a remote login with you should be there as an ESCO from the site. We certainly face issues, especially with banks and all, where data is sensitive and we cannot connect to their server and all those things. It becomes challenging. So we at the start only make sure that you can get all those details and connectivities, or maybe some other ways to get it in a pen drive or something like that, which needs to be taken, and it needs to be monitored at least monthly. So coming to the point, like for after consumption reduction, if you are having consumption reduction, your ECMs are definitely working. Whatever parameters that you have set for a BMS and an equipment to work, they are working as per the design, and it's well and good. The pain point comes is if you are not seeing a reduction in your consumption, then all these trends that you have selected will help you to do a non-routine adjustment. Now, non-routine adjustment basically means that uh, it will be done on paper first, and same time you can ask the site to make sure that your system is working as per the set points or defined what you can say, kind of schedule which we have defined. So if they are not going as per schedule, then if you are having trends monthly, then you need not wait for the end of year, because you are not doing reporting monthly. Generally, you will do a annual reporting. So yearly guarantees are defined. So in that case, if you wait for the end of the year, it's going to be too late. So if you're seeing this monthly, if it is not followed, you can ask the team to go on site, or maybe pick up a phone, talk to the customer, tell them that I can see your trends. There are so many manual overrides you're doing. Such and such things are doing happening. For that, you need evidence. For that, you need trends and you need logs. And once that are there, you can go back and tell them that you can set it again to the right place, and then the savings can be achieved. Like it might be like you will have sufficient time through the year to compensate on the lack of savings or the lack of reduction that you would have seen at the initial phase.
Okay. I hope you got your answer, Narayan sir. Next question from Vinod Kumar. What is FAT and SAT?
FAT is factory acceptance test, and SAT is site acceptance test. Uh, in short, its importance is basically, especially from efficiency point of view. A factory acceptance test is what I really don't go ahead with, because it is in a controlled environment. Factory is having a controlled environment. Over there, they are going to do the test and give you the report. But when that equipment comes to your site and it is connected to your site, let's say your chiller has now come to the site, it is connected to your pipings. It is not ideal stage. So the efficiency which it will show in a factory acceptance test will definitely not be seen in the site acceptance test. So site acceptance test is equally important. You have to see how much, by how much percentage the efficiency is dropping in your current setup. It might be a system issue, or it might be an equipment issue that can also be addressed at that time only.
Okay. Uh, I hope you got your answer, Vinod sir. Next message from excellent presentation and very informative. Thanks, Mr. Omkar. My query is to the moderator. Are the presentation shared with the participant? Yeah. Of course. The presentation shared in Bhavna Chittawar, LinkedIn in Bhavna Chittawar, and also in AEE webinar, AEE India chapter on LinkedIn. Is there any query? Session not available on YouTube.
It will be on the LinkedIn channel, right? But
Yeah. I will share.
Okay.
Okay. Is there any query or question? Okay, there is no question. I
Okay.
just put LinkedIn LinkedIn name. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Omkar sir. Thank you for such a wonderful session.
Thank you everyone. Have a good day.
Yes.
Bye.